Welcome to the Reimagine podcast. Each week, give yourself 30 minutes and meet the people working hard to create the future of insurance today.
Hi, this is Paul Tyler, and welcome to another episode of the Reimagine podcast. Laura, good to see you on a fine wintry day.
Yes, it's the first official snow in New England, and it's absolutely beautiful. I'm looking out my windows, and it's still white, so I'm enjoying it at this point.
Yeah. Well, listen, we're going to have a great conversation with a very interesting guest. And I'm thinking before we start this conversation, let's see how it goes. What lessons, I think we might title this, what lessons can founders, chief innovation officers, anybody who actually wants to start a business learn from musicians? So, Laura?
Yeah.
Do you want to introduce our guest?
I would love to. So our guest today has a special place in my heart. She is a TEDx Hartford speaker from 2020. So we're going to put that in the show notes for sure. But we have with us today, we have Astrid Baumgardner. She is author, professor, coach, trainer, and all-around creative. So Astrid, thanks so much for joining us today. And please, for the benefit of our listeners, share a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to speak today about my book, Creative Success Now, and my experience in helping creatives to thrive in the 21st century. So I've had a long journey towards my current occupation, which I just love because I do lots of different things, and it just taps into my creative side and the way I think and the way I love to help people. So I was a lawyer, and then I was an executive in the nonprofit world, and then I was a consultant, and then ultimately discovered coaching at a funny time in my life when I was sort of burned out, if you will. I had left law, went into nonprofit, and was consulting, but nothing felt like it was sticking. And I kept saying, there's another big gig left inside you. And then I got really sick and was sort of taken out of commission and had to rethink, what is it that I want to do? And I actually was quite painful. It was a lot of surgeries and very traumatic experience. But from that, I actually was in a coma and I woke up on my birthday. And when I woke up on my birthday, I knew I'd come back for a reason. And 6 months later, I discovered it after recovering from another surgery where I was on my couch. And I literally heard a voice that said, Astrid, get up off that couch. You need to help people with their difficult life transitions. And that is how I discovered life coaching. And I immediately signed up for coaching school. And the rest is how I made my career today, by doing some teaching and workshops and ultimately getting to Yale, and where I've been since 2011. And then discovering that the people I want to help are the creatives, the people who are making a living from their thoughts and their hearts and their passions. And I work with professional musicians, but also people who run and lead arts organizations and creative entrepreneurs. And I find there's a real commonality because there's no roadmap to success here. And that is why I wrote my book, to help people discover how is it that I can take my creative impulses and create a sustainable and meaningful career.
Well, thanks for sharing that story. I think of Joseph Campbell's journeys or stories about the how heroes come to find themselves. I think coming out of a coma certainly is a transformative experience. Maybe we could talk about a little bit about when you know something has happened to you or you have discovered something that tells you you should seek a different path. Astrid, you and I actually have some commonalities in our background. My mother was an entrepreneur. She was an interior designer. I spent my time growing up around fabric samples, paint swatches. I paint, I drew. What did I do, Astrid, after college? I went to law school. So you can imagine how this... Yes.
So did I. Same thing.
Right. I think it was my mom she encouraged me to do it, I think, to avoid the pain that's sometimes associated with that creative urge. Now, my experience was, transformative experience, was clerking for a firm, doing a second-year clerkship in Los Angeles. Laura, I thought I was going to crawl the walls. Astrid, at that point, I was going to finish it, but I knew there was something different. What type of experiences do you see people go through where they say, I'm on a path and this is not right, and I will take that leap of faith?
Right. It usually comes at a point where the status quo is not working and it's just too painful to continue. And, people, that was me, right? My status quo, I knew there was something big there. And then literally I had this, message from the universe. So I was lucky in that sense. But a lot of my clients, it's interesting who I coach. So I coach arts leaders who are poised to sort of go into a bigger level, right? And can they do it? They're kind of scared, but they know that they've been doing what they've been doing all along, and it's got to be something different and new and better. Or I have people in transition who say, whoa, this is just not working, and I don't know what to do, right? And one of the reasons I love working with people like this is it took me, I'm going to say 25 years to figure out my career path. And I feel that the process that I've discovered for myself and that I share with my clients and students really does help. That if you have an organized way of approaching your career, it can really help you. And I think that point of, people being sort of in despair, like, oh, I need help. And then hearing, we have a process and let's do this together. And to have a coach who can be, feed you ideas and stimulate your thinking and encourage you to take some risks. And I think that's what musicians and entrepreneurs have in common, which is there's no roadmap. And the only way to create your own success, first of all, you have to know yourself. You have to know who it is that you are and what really dovetails with the thing you want to do, align who you are with what you do. And then, right, how do I get there? To be willing to try something new. And that for a lot of people is very scary. But if you still keep doing the same thing, it's Einstein's definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So I think that, I enjoy helping people design what I call life experiments, where you try out something new and you start small, right? You start there's a really great book called Working Identity by Herminia Ibarra, who's a professor at the INSEAD Business School in France. And she wrote this great book about people in mid-career making life transitions. And it takes usually about 3 years, and it requires starting out and doing little things and then discovering, oh, I really like this. Like what I tell people is shadow a friend or go do some informational interviews with people who are doing interesting things and find out what is it that they do, how did they get there, and what advice they would give to you. And sometimes it helps to, write a blog. Actually, I started writing a blog to collect all my thoughts about what I was doing in my teaching and my coaching. And the blog is what helped me to write my book, because I had probably 8 years worth of blog posts, and it wasn't exactly a cut and paste job, but at least I had a place from which to start, right? So, sometimes I tell people, go teach a class, there are lots of adult schools and community colleges that are looking for professional people who can teach. Again, anything that can stretch yourself and teach you something new about yourself so you can see yourself in a different role, And I have a really good example. I had this really interesting client who was this amazingly talented graphic artist who majored in art history and also learned how to speak Japanese. And she said, well, I'm going to graduate from college and go to Japan and try to do something with my Japanese. So she's very smart and a very creative problem solver, got hired by a company to literally be the chief problem solver. And so she did that for 15 years, came back to the United States, went to law school, and could not find the right fit. And it was funny, she went to a career counselor and they gave her a bunch of tests. And after a week, they said, we're sorry, we can't help you. You're too complicated. So she came to me and I said, well, let's design some life experiments. And literally over the course of 6 months, she started writing a blog and she got involved with her community. And she thought, well, maybe small business law, because I really love my community. And that just didn't work. And what else did she do? Continued her writing on the side and then got involved in a zoning project in her neighborhood and realized that she loved helping people solve those problems, in the community, and decided to become a mediator. So that's what she does today. She's a mediator, still is on her community board, and she went back to her graphic design and now sells her prints online and in galleries. So, and this took 6 months. So I thought that was a great example of someone who was willing to take those risks and explore different things. And ultimately, what is it that I'm learning? This is actually what was in my TED Talk, Laurie, right? The creative process, go find those experiments of, figure something out, find 1 to 3 things you want to explore and then do it. And then always reflect and use that process as a teaching experience. So it's very much, that's how I try to help people particularly those in transition.
I love it. It's fascinating. Understanding that all of your clients are individuals and they're unique. Have you found commonalities between emotional or intellectual, pieces of them? So do you find that people who come to you and are more apt to take risk, or they come to you and they're creative dreamers and they all have a similarity between them, or are they all truly unique and different?
Yeah, I'm going to answer yes and, right? So, of course, everybody's individual, and I tailor my approach to the individuals, both in my class at Yale and in my trainings and in my coaching. But I would say the commonalities are everyone I work with is really, I think, motivated by having a sense of purpose in life. Purpose-driven people who care about giving back to the world, using their talents and their strengths in a way to make the world a better place. I think that's what a lot of creatives do, right? I think that's the creative impulse. I think a lot of creative entrepreneurs also, have this idea, start a company because they think this is just going to make the world a better place and it's going to make me a lot happier. I also think that the people I work with are values driven. So I'm very big on discovering those core principles that run your life. Because I think when you know what's important to you, then it makes it a lot simpler to decide what's important and to be able to embrace opportunities that align with your values and say no to things that just are not consistent with your values. So I think those two things are very much in line, and also passions. I think the people I work with are very passionate. And I have a sort of broader definition of passion. I mean, it's sort of right for a musician. Yes, they're passionate about music. My creative entrepreneurs, I work with a graphic designer. She's passionate about design and art, but also about helping people and communication, right? It just depends what your passions are. And I think people often feel limited, like, oh, I don't have a passion. I don't love French, or I don't love music. But there's other things that you can love, right? You can love those subjects, but also I think you can also find passion in your sense of mission, especially because I work with a lot of people in the nonprofit world. You can find passion in the way you interact with people. I think that's a passion too. And there's so many different ways, right? Do you love to be with big groups, one-on-one, small groups? Are you a teacher, a coach, a mentor? Those to me are passions. I also think that there's a passion in the way you think and solve problems. And, often when I present this to people, this is particularly people in transition who feel really stuck, it does open up their minds to thinking, oh, yeah, I guess I do have a passion. It's just not a common one.
I think that's fascinating. I heard something the other day that kind of struck me, where as young kids, we are taught to find something to be good at, right? So a hobby, whether it's baseball or drawing or you name your favorite thing, and you have to be good at it. And the conversation was around, well, do we actually have to be good at it, or do we just have to enjoy it? So in this sense, it's a bit different because I know you have to be, one would hope that you're going to be good at something in order to make a living off of it. But the passion piece of it really struck me. And I had to share that with you, Astrid, because I'm sure that we find ourselves striving to be the perfect version of oneself, when imperfection may not be the same thing that aligns with the meaning of passion anyway.
Well, it's an interesting word you use, perfection, because I think a lot of creative people get stuck in the trap of thinking that they have to be perfect. My art has to be perfect. My app has to be perfect. My video game has to be perfect. And that's a trap, because what is perfect, right? That's sort of an illusion. And that is one thing that I work with a lot of creative people on, is trying to dispel that voice of perfectionism. One that I know very well, because I've had it too. I play the piano. I've been playing the piano since I was a child, and for years was stymied because I thought I had to play every single note perfectly. And that just robs you of being able to creatively express yourself. So, helping people to understand that perfection is not the goal, that beauty, that wonderfulness, that, excitement, inspiration. There are just many other ways to motivate yourself. And that, often, like if you go to a concert, because I love live music, if the piano, and I'm a pianist, so I listen very particularly to piano concerts, okay, so once in a while there might be a note that's a little off, but it's the spirit. It's the way the person is communicating their art to the audience and making that connection. And I think that's way more important. So, there's a lot of work to be done because I call perfectionism one of the creativity killers. Like when you're setting out to set up goals. I mean, actually setting a goal is not so hard. I try to help people set inspiring goals, right? Goals that reflect their purpose and that reflect their values, right? And that reflect their passions. And what gets in the way for a lot of people is thinking that they have to achieve that goal perfectly. And so it's very much work about, well, how do you undo that? Or it's actually not undo, it's how do you manage that? How do you manage it? Because I think it's very interesting in working with high achievers the way I do, that voice of perfectionism and the fear of failure comes up, male, female, no matter what age, no matter what level you've hit in your career, that nagging little voice that says, who do you think you are? Do you really think you can do this, right? And how do you manage that? And there are a lot of ways to do that. A lot of my work is very much informed by positive psychology, which is something I discovered in my coach training and ultimately I took a lot of courses in this. And I, in fact, just recently, in the last year, completed a certificate in the science of happiness with an amazing professor, Tal Ben-Shahar, about, how to embrace the whole concept of happiness and well-being and share that with other people, right? And so a lot of the work that I've done is very much informed by research and science because I want people to see that there's credibility in doing this. It's not just some spa feel-good thing that can come and go in a day. And the whole notion of positive psychology to me starts with what I call your positive mindset, which, for me, I start everybody off on mindset, right? It's your approach to life. And a lot of the times, like this whole idea of perfectionism or fear of failure, comes up because in your experience, you think that's what you need to do to get ahead. And so it's informed by your experience. And the good news on mindset is that you can actually change it with a lot of modalities. So one of them that I really like comes from, again, a positive psychology concept called flow. So I think we all know, being in the flow, being in the zone where you're just doing something that you're really good at and you love and you lose track of time. And it's actually a psychological concept developed by the late Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, which is your level of optimal performance. And it is when you're doing something, yes, that you're really good at and that you're challenged, and yet you are up to that challenge. So it's not so hard that you give up, and it's not so easy that you're bored. So you get into this zone where you're constantly striving to achieve that challenge, and you can do it, right? I mean, people get into this zone playing music, developing a video game, starting a company, having an amazing meeting, for hours and hours. And it can also be moments and moments, just an amazing conversation you're having or an encounter with nature, again, doing something that just puts you in that flow state. So I help people capture that flow state, and I will do this meditation where people will actually embrace and call up one of those experiences of flow. And then what is it that you're like? And you find the language that describes you, and you hear these really great words, right? Excited, confident, inspiring, out of body experience, things like that to capture that language and then to use that as your personal, affirmation, if you will, So, and I help executives with this, right? Like if you're going into some really tough board meeting, right? Or you're making a pitch to some really big time investors. Before you go into that meeting, take 3 deep breaths and call up some of those flow words because it comes from your actual experience and it can be very motivating and inspiring. People use this all the time. My musician clients, my entrepreneurs, right? It's just a great reminder. And in under 3 minutes, you can do this to kind of transform your mindset.
Oh, fascinating. And just to reinforce a couple of words you used, perfection and goals, right? I think it's exceptionally hard to launch a business. I think of what the failure rate is for startups, especially startups that require venture capital. You mentioned walking in, those and have those moments when you're pitching for money. Oh, by the way, you may have to do this 100 times before you get the money. It has to be the same on in the music field. Astrid, I'm sure even coming from Yale music school, I bet the odds of making it to that first or second or third seat in the violin section must be exceptionally high. How do you first of all tell me if I'm right or wrong, and then what other techniques, if you kind of went through the list of techniques, how do you keep somebody in flow when they're going to get a lot of rejection over the course of a number of weeks or months or years?
Yes, and I totally agree with what you're saying. It's very similar. Actually, I have a great story of someone who is a musician and also created a successful startup. And one of the techniques that really helped him, his name is Igor. He's actually in my book. And Igor was a student in my class, very talented guy, because I teach master's students and musicians at the Yale School of Music. So we're talking a very high level. But he really wasn't sure what he wanted to do, and he wasn't sure he wanted a performance career. And he was really very stuck. In fact, he came from Germany, and he met with me on his first day at Yale and said, if I have to go back to Germany and teach guitar to little kids, I will consider my life a failure, right? So he had a goal right from the start, which was not to do that, right? So my class is a project-based class, and he and he's a guitar player, another guitar student came up with this idea that even though they're at Yale and have these amazing teachers, they're not taught how to practice, which is what you really need to get better. So they decided to start a little website where famous guitar students and teachers would put their practice techniques, make these videos, and people would subscribe to this. So they were so excited about this. So in my class, they actually got $1,000 from our Entrepreneurship Institute, created the website, and then second semester, they decided they were going to go big time on this, and they applied for a summer incubator grant at the Yale Entrepreneurship Institute, and they got it. So they got both mentoring, $15,000, I think, in startup expenses, and they actually created a company called Tonebase. And then in his second and final year of his master's, Igor, in addition to all the schoolwork he had at Yale, started pitching to investors, and ultimately was able to raise millions of dollars. And this is now a successful company that went from guitar, now has piano videos, and now has done violin, and they're expanding to cello now, right? So now how did he do this? You're absolutely right. Did he get that $1 million from one investor? Absolutely not. There is a lot of rejection. And I have a thing that I say to my music students in particular and to my clients, that rejection is not failure, right? Rejection just means you didn't get what it is you set out to do. So what did you learn from that? And the big takeaway from Igor was a concept that I teach and that I coach on called the growth mindset. So this is really important because the growth mindset is all about how you use your talent and intelligence. So growth mindset says, talent and intelligence are my starting points of success. And in order to be successful, I need to obviously work hard, try out new things, embrace the mistakes and the failures and learn from it and keep going. And that is in contrast to what's called the fixed mindset, which says my talent and my intelligence are limited. And therefore, if I make a mistake, it means I'm not talented or smart. If I take a risk and fail, it means that my life is over, right? And so fixed mindset people tend to stay in their comfort zones. And you see this a lot with child prodigy athletes, child prodigy musicians who are just naturally talented and just better than all the other kids. And then what happens when they hit their teens or their early 20s? And all of a sudden, people who are working hard are starting to get better at them, and they literally freak out and either accept that it's time to start working hard, or they sort of crater, they fall apart, right? Anyway, Igor thought this whole notion of the growth mindset was great because it liberated him to go out and try out this project in my class. Well, let's go and try and get that $25,000, $15,000 venture grant from Yale. Let's pitch the investors. Is it hard? Of course it's hard. But if you believe in yourself and you believe in your idea and you're constantly learning and taking in the feedback, it's very motivating to keep going. And what's interesting, so what I've described in this research on growth mindset and fixed mindset comes from a brilliant professor, Carol Dweck, who's at Stanford. She's written this fabulous book called Mindset that I just recommend to everybody. And and her research bears out that people who are able to embrace this growth mindset approach are more likely to be successful than people with the fixed mindset. So okay, what to do? There's actually a strategy for how to develop the growth mindset. And it is, first of all, it's really interesting. What Carol Dweck says, do not banish the fixed mindset because it's going to come up. As I said, it's sort of like the voice of fear of failure and perfectionism. It's going to happen. And so if you try to rub it out, it's a non-starter. So embrace the fact that you have both mindsets. 2, understand what you're like under the fixed mindset, right? And she has an interesting exercise that I have my students do, which is write up a paragraph and give your fixed mindset a name. And what are you like when the fixed mindset crops up? So I've had some great ones in my class. There was this one young lady in my class who came up with her fixed mindset name was Sally, because every Friday, Sally would write a long newsletter detailing this woman's faults. So she could look forward every Friday to hearing from Sally, right? We've had Robot. We've had Dick. That was a big one, right? For whatever reason. But the point is, when you start running this out, you begin to see, oh dear, this is what it does to me. And also, you're a little more objective when you've written a paragraph and you can sort of see it and again, embrace it and almost laugh at it, right? And then the third thing is to understand, to affirm that you can change. And there are lots of different ways to do that, which is one way. Remember I told you about those flow words? When the fixed mindset comes up and says, who do you think you are? You can say, actually, I embrace, I'm inspiring, I'm positive, I'm magnetic, and again, those affirmations to remind you of what you're like at your best. And I have another one, my law background, Paul, you will appreciate this, right? You literally look at the evidence, right? Okay, so I'm a failure. I'm never going to make it. Everybody else is like going on world tour, and here I am, a student at Yale. That was actually one from one of my class, right? Well, how true is that? Okay, yes, it is true. You are a student at Yale. That is the evidence. But in terms of you're never going to make it, and then you sort of list all the things that you have accomplished to remind yourself that it is a journey and a process. And in fact, one thing I tell my students and my clients to do is keep a journal. And I have a new journaling thing that I've introduced, which I think is pretty interesting. And that is to document the risks you take, the mistakes you make, the successes you've experienced, and what you've learned. And if you start doing that, you can actually see, again, it's a process that slowly of improvement. It's not going to be a straight line. But again, to document that, you know what, you're on the road. It's a journey. And don't worry about if somebody else has gone on the world tour or if somebody else has gotten that $1 million funding.
I really like that. Yeah. Really like it. Laura, what's the name of your fixed mindset? I want to know that.
I hadn't given it thought before this, but the first name that popped into my brain was Dwight.
Oh, I've got mine. Dorothy. She looks like the Wicked Witch of the West. She's little and she's, right? That's mine.
Paul, how about you? What is yours?
I'm going to have to give that a little bit of thought. It's, maybe it's, I think I would have to dig deep, Astrid, in one of the law treatises to find a name. I don't know.
That's okay. Again, it's a process, right? It just takes a little time. It took me a while to come up with Dorothy, trust me.
I like that, though. I mean, it sounds like it's a combination of acknowledgement, acceptance, affirmation, kind of moving yourself along through that path from idea to success. I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about your book as well. And I know that some of these concepts are within that, but from the book, The Skillsets of Success, what's one or two skill sets we haven't touched upon yet that you'd like to call out?
Sure. Skill sets. Okay, so that's the how-to. I would say the way I go about goal setting. Okay? So as I said, setting a goal, not so hard. What do I want to achieve in a time period? I think that's a mistake that a lot of people make. It's like, I want to create this company. I want to make $1 million. Okay, by when, right? Because once you start putting a time period around, it gets more serious. I learned this when I was in coaching school, and I had this flash. I have, and I trust my intuitions. My intuition told me that what I really wanted to do was to teach at a major conservatory. And so in July of 2008, I wrote in my journal, in 5 years, I am teaching at a major conservatory like Juilliard, or maybe even Yale. And the next day, when I woke up and saw that in my journal, it was like, let's get to work. Let's do it, right? It was very motivating because that was something I was really excited about achieving, right? So the first thing is write down that goal, because there's research showing that people who write down their goals are more likely to achieve them, right? So let's set the goal. And the goal should be inspiring. And I define that by tapping into what I call your authenticity set. Does it reflect your values, those core principles? Does it reflect your passion? Does it reflect your life purpose, the thing you want to do to make the world a better place? And can you use your strengths to get there? That's another thing I want to just call out, strengths work. Another very important part of positive psychology is being able to know what it is you are good at and to develop the things you're already good at, those natural talents that really fuel you, that energize you, as opposed to compensating for weaknesses. Again, research will show us that people who are able to play to strengths are, again, more likely to achieve success and also happiness, right? Let's remember my year-long course in happiness. Strengths are a very big part of that. So you set these goals and you look at them and they've got to be yummy and inspiring. And then you got to break them down, right? Because you can set that great 10-year goal. I do this with people all the time, right? In 10 years, I'm going to be the CEO of my big, successful, wonderful company, right? And that seems a little daunting. So how do you break that down? So I use a SMART goal process, which I really like. SMART standing for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. And what I do, by the way, the A of SMART, attainable, if you cannot answer yes, then that is the wrong goal. You have to believe that you can attain it. You may not know how, but in your heart of hearts, you believe you can do this, right? And if not, then you should reframe your goal. So what we do is we take the 10-year goal and then I'll say, if that's your 10-year goal, what do you have to be doing in 5 years, right? To break that down into 5 years. And then we have a 5-year goal. What do we have to be doing in 3 years to achieve that 5-year goal? What do we have to be doing in 1 year, in 6 months, in 3 months? Break it down to a time period in which you can see success, and that becomes step one, your goal achievement. And people really like this sort of SMART goal thing, because it just, again, makes it manageable. I think a lot of overwhelm can be overcome if you just break things down, right? Like even writing a term paper, right? What's step one? Go to the library, find the right books, and okay, I can do that, Same thing with the SMART goal, right? What is that action step that you can take? And then the other really important thing is to understand what challenges do you face in achieving that goal. So I break this down by external challenges, things like, do I have the skills? Oh, okay, so maybe I need to practice more. Do I have the professional training, right? Maybe I have to go to school and get a graduate degree or get a certificate or something, right? Do I have the necessary experience? Are my finances in order? What do I need to do financially in order to achieve these goals, And what kind of career development strategies do I need? Do I need to do some more networking, meet some more people, get my materials together, create a website, whatever it is? I call all that stuff external, right? Logistics, problems to solve. Then, to me, the really interesting ones are what we've been discussing up to now, the internal challenges, right? Those what I call the creativity killers, my fear of failure, the perfectionism, comparing and despairing, right? And sometimes those obstacles, be it the external ones or the internal ones, can become so important that becomes your immediate goal, right? Okay, I better go to graduate school, or I better get an internship, or I better, meet a whole bunch of people who can maybe lead me to someone who could be an investor, that sort of thing, right? So you set a parallel goal, and then it's all about action taking. None of this is going to happen unless you actually go out and create the opportunities for yourself. I think it's a mistake. I see it at Yale. People who really think that if they just spend 10 more hours a week practicing the violin, that's what's going to get them ahead. No. Yes, it's wonderful to be a superb violinist. You've just got to get yourself out into the world. And I admit, for some people, that's a whole lot easier. Like my guy, Igor. I mean, he was just a natural at this. He's now the CEO of this very successful company. But I think some of this can be trained. I think people skills, networking can be taught if you break it down and figure out, are you a more one-on-one kind of person? So you go network one-on-one. If you love big groups, great. Go to those big parties and meet people, whatever it is. Find your comfort zone and start small. That's another thing I think that helps people to create success is start small and build on those small successes, right? And always evaluate, what am I learning? What's working? How do I like achieving this goal? Maybe you're 6 months into it and you go, this is not fun. I'm not having a good time. Change the goal. You're in charge, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I think everybody read you must spend 10,000 hours doing something to be really good at it. And in our own lives, a lot of times I personally find myself chasing that checklist for what has to be done. But unfortunately, by the end of the day, how much time should Laura and I be setting aside thinking about those SMART goals you describe about your purpose, your mission in life?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So that's my whole chapter on time management. And again, it starts with knowing your values and deciding what is really important to you in life. There's a really great thing, the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. Covey came up with a really great quadrant system. And it depends on how important something is and how urgent something is. By the way, apparently he got that from the U.S. Army. They did that, but he perfected it. And so he calls it quadrant 2 time management. So the quadrants are quadrant 1, important and urgent. That's like all the stuff we all get very hung up about, right? Oh, it's due today. I've got to do it, right? So then important and urgent. Then we move over to important and not urgent, meaning that it's vitally important to me and no one except perhaps my spouse or partner cares that I accomplish this. And that's what you do where you start thinking, so what is it that I want to achieve in life? And not just career-wise, but holistically, right? What kind of lifestyle? What kind of relationships? What is it that drives me? What is it that gives me great satisfaction? You write all that stuff down. And also, very interesting, he also says, be sure to write in restore and relax time. Because I think a lot of very successful people just drive themselves and forget about that piece that we're human beings, not machines, and you have to be able to restore, right? So you write all that stuff down. That's quadrant 2. Then we go to quadrant 3, which is urgent and not important. This is when you say yes to other people for stuff that's really not important to you, which I think we all do. Oh, what if I say no? They won't like me. Or what if I say no? I'll never get this opportunity again. So you land up saying yes to all this stuff that's just not important. And the trick there is to say, okay, how does this help me achieve happiness, success, my goals, and to be able to say no without apology. Thank you for this great opportunity. It's just not working for me. You might want to talk to my friend Sue. She'd be a much better fit, right? You can do that. So that's urgent and not important. And then quadrant 4, and this is a really interesting one. Not important, not urgent. This is when we numb out on the internet, right? Endless shopping, endless eating, binge this, binge Netflix. It is also procrastination, perfectionism, all that stuff. So this is how the system works. Be very clear on your quadrant 2 and slot in every week a quadrant 2 activity or 2 so that you're really building on that. And it can be 15 or 20 minutes a week. Just being very, very conscious and intentional about building into those quadrant 2 things. Quadrant 1, try to really sculpt that down and be very clear on what is actually urgent. And another sort of reframe that helps is to look at your quadrant 1 list and see which of these activities is actually helping you to build towards your quadrant 2. Because again, that changes the energy around it. It's like it's urgent and I'm applying for that grant because that could propel me into the next level of, my career sort of thing. Quadrant 3, be very careful what you say yes to. And quadrant 4, try to minimize that. And I'll give you an example. I mentioned in quadrant 2, restore, right? Restore, relax. I mean, for some people, myself included, a half an hour on Netflix or an hour on Netflix is really, really relaxing. 5 hours on Netflix puts you into quadrant 4. And the idea is that if you can really try to minimize the quadrant 4 stuff and the quadrant 3 stuff, that gives you more time to devote to the things in your quadrant 2.
I most recently got better at the saying no to the things that people ask me to do. And I do have to say, next time you need 30 minutes on Netflix just to zone out, last night I found myself enjoying Chef versus Snack. And I'm not going to go into it, but I love myself some cooking shows, always have some OG Emeril Lagasse. But it was a fascinating transition going back to the saying no and not being sorry about it.
Mm-hmm.
How wonderful is that feeling to be like, thank you so much for this.
Yeah.
Here's my friend. I'll even make the introduction. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it.
So liberating. Oh, I was as the queen of people pleasing back in the day, right? Oh man, I got myself in a lot of trouble. In fact, I had this one period, like after I was in a startup and it just didn't work out and I kind of didn't know what I was doing. So I just said yes to everything. Oh my God, it was so awful. I was going to meetings at 8 o'clock in the morning and 8 o'clock at night and just promising all this stuff to other people. And it was so awful. Ugh. So I learned my lesson the hard way.
All right. I will steal a question that Laura typically asks, but I'm going to put a twist on it, Laura.
All right. Okay.
So
I'll
Astrid,
forgive you then.
Laura loves to ask people about their purpose. And it's great. We get some really good answers, especially among startup founders, as you can imagine. But for you, how often does purpose change? Like, I think if I went back and talked to my 18-year-old self, 19, 20, 30, 40, I'll stop there, self. Now, I think the way I'd articulate the purpose has changed. I'm not sure the core purpose has. I mean, what do you find with your clients? Does it change over time?
I think maybe it gets refined, but I don't really think fundamentally it changes if you're really being honest about it. I have this really interesting process that I learned from this absolutely fabulous woman. I took a class in it with her, where you dig deep into your 7 stories of success, and they're holistic. It's not just career, but also from your education, from your relationships. And then you start looking at the words that are in common and you put together this life purpose statement. And it's very much about how you put together the things you're really good at, the things you really love, and how, as I said, how you're serving the world, right? And she maintains it, and I think she's right. I learned this from her, that if you do it as a teenager, it probably doesn't change all that much. Just what you said, refine. So with her, my purpose became to use particular talents to spread creativity and joy throughout the world. And I did this about 10 years ago, and it really is so true. And I use this, again, as a way of evaluating opportunities that come my way and creating opportunities. Because my latest thing that I'm doing, because I'm so excited about this science of happiness stuff, is that, first of all, I'm teaching it to leaders in these arts organizations and into people that run companies about how you can embrace these principles of happiness and well-being and then bring it back to your organization. Share it with the people who work for you. And embrace that to create a culture that nurtures well-being of the well-being of its people. And why do this? Because the research shows that when you introduce these practices into organizations, they're more profitable. People are more productive. There are better workplace relationships, right? It's just better. And what's kind of frustrating is that I think a lot of people say, well, that's nice, but I don't have time for that. And the thing is, but you don't not have time for it because it can actually make you better off. So this other thing that I'm initiating in the new year is to create what I call a happiness connection community, where I'm inviting leaders to come and join this community where they'll learn about these happiness practices so that they can practice it on themselves and then take it back to their organizations. So I think purpose is a really, really important part of it, because purpose embraces your values, it embraces your passions and your strengths. So it kind of sums up all these things that in my book I call your authenticity set. And again, my whole philosophy about helping people is first have that positive mindset and that persevering mindset that I talked about in the growth mindset, and the proactive mindset where you're going out and, accomplishing the things that are going to help you get to where you want to be. So that's mindset. And then authenticity set, right? What we just described about values and strengths and passions and purpose. And then the skill sets of success. And I think that's what my book describes. And I have lots of stories and examples. And I'm even creating the workbook finally on how to, because I'm a big believer in how, right? I can give you the concepts, but if you just go home with that, it's not going to really help you. But it's like, how do you actually do this? So that's kind of what I try to do.
Yeah, Laura, so how do we close this?
Well, I think this one's fun because it's less of a closing than an opening. I think I'd close it by, first off, Astrid, thank you. And then secondly, inviting listeners to go and start to implement just one of these practices. Pick up Astrid's book, start to learn, understand, whether it's identifying your values, your purpose, going on that journey, figuring out what you're going to say no to first as you work to build your strengths. I think it's more of a build your own adventure than a formal close, I'd say, Paul.
Yeah. Hey, Astrid, thanks so much for coming. We'll put links to your book in your website on our in the show notes. What else? How else should people reach out and get to know you?
Oh, well, thank you very much. Yeah, just, you can send me an email. That's Astrid at astridbaumgardner.com. I do take on a few coaching clients here and there. I have a couple of openings in the new year. Or just, if you're interested, shoot me an email. I'd love to talk to you and find out more about what you're doing and what your passions are and where you're going with your career. And if you're interested in joining this happiness circle, definitely get in touch with me. I'm super excited about this because I just think the work is so wonderful. People say, so Astrid, after this year-long course, are you happier? And I would say I'm a pretty positive person to begin with. But what it's really helped me with is, first of all, slowing down, one thing, right? And being more mindful, because meditation is a big part of this. And also, a big thing that I learned was what's called the permission to be human, embracing all your emotions and not being afraid of what we call those difficult emotions. And it's really interesting because the Yale Center on Emotional Intelligence has created this app called the Mood Meter, where you sort of understand and you track your moods and you learn how to define your emotions and embrace them. And they have a new one called How We Feel. That's awesome because it trains you in not just noticing your emotions, but how to harness the ones that help you and what to do in situations where the emotions are really difficult and how to manage that. So How We Feel. It's very cool.
Oh, fascinating. Okay, well, that's a whole nother conversation topic, I think. So listen, Astrid, thanks so much for your time. And Laura, thank you. And want to thank our listeners. Give us feedback, give us comments, and join us again next week for another episode of the Reimagine Podcast. Thanks.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend us on iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more great information about this company and other great startups at imagine.nfg.com.